Russia liquidates some 80 billion of US Treasuries in 2 months. Will China follow? Coming up in this episode. I'm Marco Byrne, the Research Director of goldcore.com, the international precious metals specialist. And today we are looking at the important ongoing story of Russia liquidating and dumping in a huge way their massive stockpile of US Treasuries that they've amassed over the last 10, 15 years. So the TIC data, Treasury International Capital, TSC update, something we've looked at for years, basically confirms that the massive reduction we saw in US Treasuries by the Russians in April continued in May, and they sold basically 81 billion in 2 months. Down from just under 100 billion. So it's nearly an 80% reduction in 2 months, which is absolutely massive, you know. And meanwhile, as we know, they're buying gold. They're buying 300,000 to 700,000 ounces of gold. Sorry, up to 1 million and 1 million ounces of gold in certain months. But generally, the average, I think, around 500,000 ounces of gold every single month. So it's a very important story. I don't think the ramifications of the story are being understood, the potential ramifications of it. And yeah, obviously what's happening, the backdrop is the huge tensions between the US and Russia. Donald Trump is obviously been making sounds towards Russia and towards Putin, and there's huge opposition to what Trump is doing in that regard. But there's basically huge tensions between these two nuclear-powered nations, and the Russians, yeah, they're subject to sanctions as we speak, and more recently the US intensified the sanctions, and they basically, yeah, they targeted senior people in the Russian government, and indeed some of, I think 7 of Russia's richest men were also targeted in the most recent batch of sanctions. So the tensions are very, very deep, and this appears to be a response by Russia to the sanctions from America, and basically, yeah, I mean, 80 billion is a huge amount, and it's interesting. The media coverage tend to focus on the fact that Russia fell off the US list of major holders of US Treasuries, but we don't think that's the real story. We think the real story is the fact that in 2 months they basically dumped nearly their entire holdings of US Treasury. I think that's potentially a bigger story than the fact that they fell off some list. I mean, so yeah, I think it's important to focus on that and what it means, and then who is buying US Treasuries, because there were buyers, there were actually net buyers in May, and the Chinese bought a little bit. They have stopped buying, and then essentially their buying has flatlined, but they did buy a little bit in May, and the Japanese bought some in May as well. But the Japanese have gradually been declined. There has been a decline in the Japanese holdings of US Treasuries in recent months and years from very high levels. So the elephant in the room, and what people aren't considering, is what will China do? And obviously there's trade wars with China now. There's increasing tensions with China, including geopolitical tensions and what's happening in the Pacific, and tensions regarding Taiwan and North Korea, and Trump is being quite aggressive in this regard, and the rhetoric regarding China is actually resembles the rhetoric that we saw with Russia only a few months ago and in recent years. So the Chinese I don't think the Chinese are going to aggressively dump treasuries in the way that the Russians have done, because if they did, they would massively devalue their holdings, and they have some 3 trillion in foreign exchange reserves. So I think they'll be quite careful how they do it, but I think they will potentially start selling in a small way, and even a small amount of selling in terms of the proportion of their foreign exchange reserves and the US Treasuries is quite a significant amount of US Treasuries, and that will force, I think, potentially the US will be forced to go back to quantitative easing and to buy their own government bonds again. It's interesting who the buyers are in recent months. A huge amount of buying out of the Cayman Islands, and the question is who is the buyers? Who are the buyers in Cayman Islands? And also, little old Ireland is up to 300 billion of US Treasuries, and it was one of the largest holders of US Treasuries, above Brazil, the UK, Switzerland, Luxembourg, Hong Kong, and and Cayman Islands. And we do have a financial centre here in Ireland, the IFSC, and it's believed that a lot of the buying is in Ireland is coming from this financial centre. And the question is, who are the owners and who are the buyers of these treasuries? You know, because it's huge that Ireland's this tiny country. It's more than our GDP, 301 billion. You know, so anyway, the bottom line is we think it's an important story. We think it's an ongoing story. It's going to continue. And the question is, what does China do? And do China and Russia escalate their gold buying, which we believe they potentially will if these geopolitical tensions and currency wars escalate, as unfortunately we believe they will do in the coming weeks and months. So thanks for your time. Yeah, keep an eye on this story. It's something we cover quite frequently. We think it's important. And yeah, if you have any questions at all, send us an email, info@goldcore.com, and we endeavor to answer all questions from our clients and our subscribers. And yeah, you can follow us on all the usual channels and subscribe to our podcast on YouTube. And again, thanks for your time. Take care. Bye-bye.